Alexander Nikolaevich Spesivtsev had a troubled early life. Born on March 1, 1970, in Novokuznetsk, he grew up in a cramped apartment on Pionersky Prospect. As a newborn, he was frail and frequently fell ill, but he managed to survive. However, his childhood was marked by social isolation and bullying at school. Spesivtsev had no friends and struggled to fit in. His mother, Lyudmila Spesivtseva, played a significant role in his life. She worked at a nearby school and the prosecutor's office, and despite their unusual bond, she was affectionate toward her son. At a young age, Lyudmila introduced Alexander to disturbing images of corpses from books about criminal cases. They even shared a bed until he turned 12, creating a close but unsettling relationship. As Spesivtsev grew older, his sadistic tendencies became more pronounced. In 1988, at the age of 18, he met his first girlfriend, initially presenting himself as poetic and charming. However, their relationship quickly deteriorated, and they frequently argued. When she finally decided to break up with him, Spesivtsev couldn't accept it. He resorted to kidnapping her and held her captive in his apartment, subjecting her to unimaginable torture for an entire month. Tragically, she succumbed to sepsis and passed away. As a result of his heinous actions, Spesivtsev was deemed mentally unstable and was sent to the Oriol Special Psychiatric Hospital at the age of 18. It was there that his dark and twisted journey into infamy began. After being discharged from the Oriol Special Psychiatric Hospital in 1991, Alexander Nikolaevich Spesivtsev delved deeper into the darkness that consumed him. He sought out the company of transients and beggars, forming connections with those on the fringes of society. However, his interactions with these marginalized individuals only fueled his growing hatred for street children, whom he saw as a product of Russia's evolving democracy. Spesivtsev's resentment intensified due to a distressing incident during his time at the psychiatric hospital. Seeking a misguided path to virility, he asked a fellow patient to insert a metal ball into his urethra. The ill-fated experiment backfired, causing erectile dysfunction and excruciating genital pain. This experience left him even more embittered. Motivated by his deep-seated animosity towards street children, Alexander, along with his mother Lyudmila, began luring victims into their apartment. Randomly selected, these unsuspecting victims, often unaccompanied street children who frequented discotheques or played in construction sites, became the targets of their sadistic desires. Inside the confines of their apartment, Spesivtsev would subject them to unspeakable torture, ultimately ending their lives. The depravity didn't stop there. In some cases, the bodies of their victims were cannibalized, adding an unimaginable level of horror to their crimes. To dispose of any unwanted remains, Lyudmila would discreetly empty buckets containing human remains into the Aba River under the cover of darkness. The impoverished city of Novokuznetsk, still reeling from the aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse, provided a grim backdrop for their malevolent acts. Spesivtsev's reign of terror and his mother's complicity plunged the community into a state of fear and despair as they hunted their innocent prey. The quiet city of Novokuznetsk was abruptly shaken by a grim discovery along the river Aba. The banks became hauntingly adorned with gangrenous severed heads, torsos, and arms of young children, their identities lost in the horror. At first, the authorities struggled to comprehend the sinister truth that lay before them. Initially, the notion of a serial killer seemed far-fetched. However, as large groups of unattended children continued to vanish without a trace, suspicions turned towards the existence of a relentless mass murderer operating within the city's boundaries. Fear gripped the community as parents anxiously guarded their children, and an air of trepidation settled over the once peaceful streets. While the investigation unfolded, the Regional Directorate of Internal Affairs pursued alternative theories. The presence of criminal gangs from the Caucasus region in Novokuznetsk at that time led investigators to consider the possibility of organ smuggling. Vigilantly, the police meticulously inspected the baggage of outgoing flights, hoping to uncover any potential leads or evidence. The urgency to apprehend the perpetrator escalated, prompting the deployment of several hundred internal troops and police officers. Every corner of the city was combed in a desperate search for the killer, whose identity at one point was believed to be Oleg Rylkov. The weight of the investigation bore heavy on the shoulders of law enforcement as they grappled with the darkness that had descended upon their community. As the search for answers intensified, the city held its breath, yearning for justice and relief from the nightmare that had cast its shadow over Novokuznetsk. Following the unsettling disappearances of several girls, witness statements provided a crucial breakthrough in the investigation. They revealed that the missing girls had been seen leaving a store with Spesivtsev's mother. It was a pivotal lead for the police, considering her son was officially recorded as undergoing psychiatric treatment at a hospital. However, an incident involving a resident refusing entry to the neighborhood police officer and a plumber raised suspicions about the son's whereabouts. The resident claimed to be mentally ill and confined within his apartment, causing alarm among the authorities. The police and the plumber, undeterred, forcibly entered the apartment. They were immediately met with a putrid stench, akin to the scent of decaying flesh. Inside the bathtub, they made a grisly discovery: a woman bleeding from a severe stab wound to the chest, and a torso devoid of limbs and head. Just as they uncovered the haunting evidence, Spesivtsev managed to escape, scaling the building's roof. However, his freedom was short-lived, as he was apprehended within the week, found cold and starving at the entrance of his house. 3 days prior to his arrest, his mother, Lyudmila, had also been taken into custody. In the wake of his capture, Spesivtsev's true nature became apparent. A diary detailing his heinous crimes was found, and he made no attempts to deny his actions. However, he only confessed to 19 murders, boasting about additional crimes that could not be substantiated. A search of his apartment yielded a macabre collection: 80 items of blood-stained clothing, nearly 40 pieces of jewelry, and photographs of unknown individuals who may have been his unproven victims. Forensic experts later confirmed that the garments belonged to the 19 identified victims. His sanity was deemed compromised by the court, leading to his commitment to a psychiatric hospital. It was revealed that Spesivtsev had previously spent 3 years in a mental institution following the torture and murder of his girlfriend. Tragically, the only living witness to his crimes, a 15-year-old girl named Olga Galtseva, succumbed to her injuries the day after being discovered. Presently, Spesivtsev resides at the Kamyshin Regional Hospital, confined within its walls. Meanwhile, his mother, charged with complicity in 3 murders, received a prison sentence of 13 years. The chilling saga of their crimes and the haunting aftermath serves as a grim reminder of the depths of human darkness that can infiltrate society. Imprisoned, Spesivtsev emerged as a poet and philosopher, condemning democracy as the destroyer of lives. In his own words, he declared, "How many people has our democracy destroyed? If people pondered, this filth would cease." But his vile acts can never find justification. Apartment 357, tainted by unspeakable horrors, remains locked and uninhabited. Maintenance workers, after fixing a window, sought solace in the church. A neighbor, asked to venture inside, never recovered. Today, hordes of pigeons occupy the apartment, whispers claiming they are tormented souls seeking peace. Thank you for joining me in the dark tale of Alexander Spesivtsev. We have been confronted with the depths of human darkness and the devastating consequences of his monstrous actions. As we grapple with the haunting legacy he left behind, may we remember the victims and strive to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the minds and history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, and put the notifications bell on so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Thank you for being here. Anatoly Yemelyanovich Slivko's early life was marked by adversity and hardship. Born on the 28th of December 1938 in Izerbash, Dagestan ASSR, Russian SFSR. He grew up in impoverished conditions as the oldest of 2 children. The backdrop of his childhood was the Ukrainian famine caused by Stalin's agricultural policies. Slivko's parents had a tumultuous relationship, frequently arguing, and his father battled alcoholism. As a child, he faced various illnesses, insomnia, and the challenges of a harsh environment. War, instability, and poverty overshadowed his early years. During the Second World War, Slivko's father was conscripted into the Red Army, exposing Slivko to the brutalities of the Nazi invasion. He witnessed atrocities and sought shelter in a cemetery, only to be rejected by other children due to his emaciated appearance. Disturbing images of mutilation haunted his memories. In adolescence, Slivko struggled academically, often daydreaming in class and achieving average grades. He discovered his homosexuality and experienced shame, keeping his sexual orientation and erectile dysfunction hidden from his family and a select few friends. Seeking a fresh start, Slivko applied for a scholarship at Moscow State University, but failed the entrance exam. Instead, he embarked on mandatory military service and was stationed in the Russian Far East. There he faced constant mockery and ridicule from fellow soldiers, who found his timid and submissive nature incompatible with military life. Eventually, Slivko was discharged due to health issues before completing his service. These formative years shaped Anatoly Yemelyanovich Slivko, setting the stage for the disturbing path he would later follow. After relocating to Stavropol Krai, Anatoly Yemelyanovich Slivko worked as a telephone engineer. His sister introduced him to a colleague named Lyudmila, whom he married in a modest ceremony. However, Slivko's sexual orientation and erectile dysfunction strained their physical relationship. They engaged in intercourse only a handful of times throughout their 17-year marriage and ceased any intimate encounters after the birth of their second child. Despite this, they established themselves as respected members of the community in Nevinomysk. Anatoly Slivko's erotic fantasies emerged after he witnessed a traumatic traffic accident in 1961. The accident involved a young boy who was fatally injured, and for reasons he couldn't explain, the scene sexually excited Slivko, leading to a powerful orgasm. He became fixated on the suffering and vulnerability of the boy, and the incident triggered a shift in his sexual desires. Slivko described the boy's convulsions and cries of agony as arousing, and he became increasingly focused on incorporating elements of pain and domination into his fantasies. The sight of blood, as well as the boy's uniform, further fueled his desires. He began to develop a fetish for boys' footwear and incorporated it into his sexual fantasies. This pivotal moment marked a turning point in Slivko's life. It awakened his overwhelming desire to engage in physical sexual relations with young males. Prior to this incident, he had repressed his sexuality, but witnessing the accident unleashed a dark and twisted side of him that would have devastating consequences. After witnessing the accident, Slivko founded a youth club in Nevinomysk, ostensibly for young pioneer activities. However, he used it to befriend boys and gain their trust. The first club was destroyed in an arson attack, allegedly by a mistreated boy. Undeterred, Slivko established a new club named Churgid. He organized hiking trips and received praise from parents and local officials. In 1977, he was elected deputy of the city council and honored as a teacher of the Soviet Union. Anatoly Slivko engaged in a series of deeply disturbing experiments involving young boys. He meticulously formed close friendships with boys between the ages of 11 and 15, targeting those who were shorter for their age and wearing young pioneers' uniforms, reminiscent of a tragic traffic accident he witnessed. Slivko manipulated the boys' trust, leading them to participate in what he claimed were controlled hanging experiments, designed to stretch the spine. Prior to each experiment, Slivko would carefully rehearse the hanging scene with the intended victim, purchasing a new uniform for them and shining their shoes. The boys were instructed to not eat for several hours beforehand to prevent any complications. Once the boy was anesthetized using ether, he would place the noose around his own neck and become unconscious. It was at this point that Slivko would engage in deeply disturbing and inappropriate actions. He would strip the boys naked, caress and fondle their bodies, arrange them in suggestive positions, and repeatedly indulge in masturbation, often onto the boys' shoes. The entire ordeal was meticulously captured on Slivko's 16mm cameras, with the footage retained to fuel his perverse erotic fantasies. To deceive the boys' parents, he claimed the videos were meant to be filmed on the stage at his youth club, where he was known for creating amateur documentaries. While some of the initial experiments took place within the confines of Slivko's youth club, known as Churgid, he gradually expanded his horizons, persuading his victims to participate in these horrifying rituals in increasingly secluded and rural locations, away from their parents' knowledge. The emotional and psychological damage inflicted on these young boys cannot be overstated, as their trust was systematically shattered by a man who should have been a mentor and protector. Over 22 years, Anatoly Slivko lured 43 boys into his horrifying experiments. After photographing and filming them, he revived most of his victims, ensuring their silence. But in 7 cases, his violence escalated. Unconscious bodies were dismembered, doused in gasoline and set ablaze, echoing the accident that sparked his depravity. Slivko kept their shoes, pictures, and films as twisted mementos, fueling his fantasies until he craved more. Nikolai Dobryshev, his first victim, met an accidental death in 1964. Slivko dismembered him, erasing evidence except for the shoes. Alexei Kovalenko, intentionally killed in 1965, was reported as a runaway. More victims vanished. Alexander Nesmeyanov in 1973, Andrei Pogasyan in 1975, both tied to Slivko's youth club. Investigations failed to uncover Slivko's involvement. 1980, Sergei Fatniev became his 5th victim, with Slivko indulging in greater sadism. Vyacheslav Kovistik followed in 1984. On July 23, 1985, Sergei Pavlov vanished after mentioning a meeting with Slivko for a home movie. Suspicion grew, and questioning revealed the horrifying hanging experiments pushed by Slivko. Following the disappearance of Sergei Pavlov, prosecutor Tamara Langieva launched an investigation into the boy's absence. Her inquiries revealed that several other boys from the same youth club had also gone missing over the years, often after mentioning participation in home movies filmed by Slivko. While the club's operation seemed legal, Langieva discovered that many members had willingly been hanged and experienced temporary amnesia upon revival. Based on Langieva's recommendation, a search warrant was issued in December 1985 for Slivko's home and youth club. Little incriminating evidence was found at his home, but a locked darkroom at the club contained numerous photographs and films depicting the heinous acts committed against his victims. Knives, axes, rope, rubber hoses, and sawn-through boys' shoes were also discovered, confirming Slivko's shoe fetish. Confronted with the evidence, Slivko confessed to 7 murders and 36 non-fatal hangings on December 28. He attributed his crimes to sexual frustration and claimed the snuff material and paraphernalia provided both erotic stimulation and a release for his internal tension. Slivko revealed that he hoped retaining the photographs and films would prevent future homicides, but over time, the desire to kill and dismember grew stronger. In February and March 1986, he led investigators to the buried bodies of 6 victims. Slivko's trial took place in June 1986. Despite pleading not guilty and claiming accidental deaths, he was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death. He appealed the conviction, but was unsuccessful. Prior to his execution, Slivko cooperated with investigators seeking insights into the mind, an unidentified serial killer active in the Rostov Oblast, at the time known as the Forest Strip Killer. Slivko provided some advice on how offenders like himself operated in society, but was unaware of the ongoing manhunt for the Forest Strip Killer. Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov serial killer, was apprehended later, convicted of killing 52 victims. Thank you all for watching and diving into this unsettling story. Comment down on what you think about this case, and what could prevent this from happening in our future. I am Alex, and this was Conundrum. Stay curious and stay safe. In the quiet neighborhood of Mytishchi, Moscow Oblast, on the 9th of April 1974, Alexander Pichushkin came into the world. He grew up in a modest two-bedroom apartment on 2 Khersenskaya Street in the heart of Moscow, surrounded by his family. Pichushkin shared his home with his mother, Natalia Elmuradovna, his younger half-sister, her husband, and their son, creating a bustling household on the 5th floor. Their apartment building, conveniently located, was just a short 6-minute walk from the tranquil oasis of Bitsa Park. As a child, Pichushkin was initially sociable and approachable, embracing the innocence of youth. However, his world took a dark turn when an incident unfolded on a seemingly harmless swing. In a fateful moment, Pichushkin fell backward off the swing, and as it swung back, it struck him forcefully on the forehead. Experts later speculated that this unfortunate accident had damaged his frontal cortex, a region of the brain crucial for impulse regulation. Such damage often leads to difficulties in controlling one's impulses, and may contribute to an increased tendency toward aggression. The impact was particularly severe for young Pichushkin, as a child's forehead provides far less protection to the developing brain than that of an adult. Following this tragic incident, the once cheerful and friendly child transformed into a hostile and impulsive individual. Pichushkin's altered behavior became a cause of concern for his mother, who made the difficult decision to transfer him from the mainstream school he attended to a specialized institution catering to children with learning disabilities. Prior to this transfer, Pichushkin had endured physical and verbal abuse from his classmates, who cruelly labeled him as that retard. These relentless acts of bullying only fueled his anger and resentment, pushing him further into a spiral of hostility. In the midst of Pichushkin's early adolescence, his maternal grandfather recognized his grandson's exceptional intelligence. Determined to cultivate Pichushkin's innate talents, his grandfather invited him to live in his own home. This change of environment proved to be a turning point in Pichushkin's life. Surrounded by encouragement and support, he was urged to pursue intellectual endeavors beyond the constraints of traditional schooling. It was during this transformative period that Pichushkin discovered his deepest passion, chess. Under the guidance of his grandfather, Pichushkin learned the intricate strategies of the game, honing his skills with unwavering dedication. Soon, his remarkable talent caught the attention of elderly chess players who frequented Bitsa Park. Pichushkin embraced the challenge, engaging in exhibition matches against these seasoned opponents, where he consistently emerged victorious. The chessboard became his sanctuary, a realm where he channeled his pent-up aggression and emerged triumphant. Despite his triumphs in the world of chess, Pichushkin's life remained marred by the torment inflicted upon him by his mainstream school peers. The pain intensified when, in the final stages of his adolescence, he suffered the devastating loss of his beloved grandfather. Suddenly thrust back into his mother's home, Pichushkin grappled with grief and a sense of aimlessness. In search of solace and a means to control his explosive anger, he turned to alcohol, particularly vodka, which he consumed in copious amounts. As he continued to play chess both at home and in the company of other men in Bitsa Park, Pichushkin's drinking became intertwined with his obsession with power. A sinister hobby began to take shape, unbeknownst to those around him. Whenever he anticipated encounters with children, he carried a video camera as a twisted tool of control. In a chilling display of dominance, Pichushkin captured moments of terror, threatening young children as he held them upside down, taunting them with the promise of a fatal fall from a window. Watching these videos repeatedly, he sought to reaffirm his twisted sense of power. By 1992, however, the thrill of these sadistic acts had begun to wane, no longer enough to satisfy the growing urges festering within Alexander Pichushkin. Motivated by a chilling desire to surpass the infamous Andrei Chikatilo, Alexander Pichushkin embarked on a murderous spree, targeting innocent victims in a sinister competition. Chikatilo, known for his heinous acts, had been convicted of killing 52 children and young women over a 12-year period. Pichushkin, aiming to outdo his predecessor, set his sights on a grim goal: to end the lives of 64 individuals, symbolizing the number of squares on a chessboard. Pichushkin's first recorded murder took place on the 27th of July 1992, when he was just 18 years old. His intended victim was his classmate, Mikhail Odichuk, whom he had arranged to meet in Bitsa Park to discuss their sinister plan. However, Odichuk had a change of heart and expressed his unwillingness to participate. Enraged by what he perceived as a betrayal, Pichushkin strangled his best friend and callously disposed of the body in a sewer entrance within the park. Sadly, Odichuk's remains were never recovered. Following Odichuk's disappearance, an investigation was launched by the Moscow police. Witnesses reported that Odichuk had last been seen with Pichushkin, heading towards the park. Pichushkin was subsequently arrested on the 30th of July, but was released due to a lack of evidence linking him to the crime. For several years after this incident, Pichushkin refrained from further killings. It wasn't until 1996, when Russia imposed a moratorium on the death penalty, that his murderous tendencies resurfaced. Between May 2001 and September 2005, an alarming period known as the sewers, Pichushkin unleashed a reign of terror upon unsuspecting victims. Predominantly targeting elderly homeless individuals, he would approach them in Bitsa Park, offering to share a drink of vodka. Once the victims' guards were down, Pichushkin would strike them on the back of the head with a hammer or bottle, or push them into the sewage canal to meet their demise. Astonishingly, out of the 36 victims he attacked during this time, 3 managed to survive their injuries. To further degrade his victims, Pichushkin would desecrate their remains, often impaling their skulls with sticks or empty vodka bottles, leaving a chilling signature behind. From October 2005 to his final murder in June 2006, known as the Open Period, Pichushkin altered his method of operation. He shifted to using a hammer as his primary weapon, repeatedly striking his victims in the head. After ensuring their demise, he would grotesquely insert a vodka bottle into the gaping wound, showcasing a macabre display of his brutality. Pichushkin preferred to attack from behind, catching his victims off guard and avoiding bloodstains on his own clothes. Shockingly, 10 of his victims resided in the very complex where he lived, with 4 coming from 2 Khersenskaya, 2 from 4 Khersenskaya, 3 from 6 Khersenskaya, and 1 from 8 Khersenskaya. In June 2006, Alexander Pichushkin convinced his co-worker Marina Moskalyova to accompany him for a walk, despite her initial suspicions about him. Before leaving, she left a note for her son, indicating that she was with Pichushkin and providing his phone number. Unfazed by the note, Pichushkin proceeded with his intentions. Moskalyova's body was discovered in Bitsa Park on the 14th of June 2006, bearing the trademark injuries inflicted by Pichushkin. A Moscow metro ticket found in her possession prompted authorities to review surveillance footage from the metro system, revealing her presence on a platform accompanied by Pichushkin shortly before her death. Following his apprehension, Pichushkin willingly guided the police to the crime scenes in Bitsa Park, displaying remarkable recollection of the murder details. He reenacted the crimes on camera, a customary practice in Russian criminal investigations. Pichushkin disclosed that some of his victims met their fate by being thrown into the sewer lines beneath Bitsa Park, deviating from his preferred method of delivering hammer blows to the back of the head. However, one victim managed to survive this ordeal. Pichushkin derived a godlike feeling from deciding whether his victims should live or die, claiming that killing was necessary for him to feel alive. He described his actions as providing a passage to another world for his victims, considering himself their father figure. In his trial on the 24th of October 2007, Pichushkin was convicted of 49 murders and 3 attempted murders. He requested the court to add 11 more victims to his tally, claiming a total of 60 deaths and 3 survivors. During the trial, Pichushkin was confined in a glass cage for his own protection. Judge Vladimir Usov handed down a life imprisonment sentence to Pichushkin, with the initial 15 years to be spent in solitary confinement. Pichushkin appealed his sentence, considering it too severe, and sought a reduction to 25 years. As of 2017, he was confined in solitary confinement at the Polar Owl Arctic Penal Colony. Hey folks, welcome back to our channel. My name is Alex, and in today's Conundrum, we will delve into the disturbing life and crimes of Anatoly Onoprienko, also referred to as the Beast of Ukraine and the Terminator. Anatoly Onoprienko's life began with tragedy. Born in 1959 in the city of Lasky, Ukraine. His mother passed away when he was just 1 or 4-year-old. Depends on the source. And despite his father's presence, Anatoly was thrown into an orphanage in Privitno, separated from his older brother Valentin, who was taken care of by their father. This early abandonment would prove to be a catalyst in shaping Onoprienko's future crimes, as he developed a deep-seated hatred and fury towards the concept of family that was denied to him in his formative years. In 1989, at the age of 30, Onoprienko committed his first murder, relatively late by serial killer standards, and continued till 1996. In March 1996, the Security Service of Ukraine and Public Prosecutor's Office specialists detained 26-year-old Yuri Mozola as a suspect of several brutal murders. Over the course of 3 days, 6 SBU members and 1 representative of Public Prosecutor's Office tortured, burning, electric shocking and beating the arrested citizen. Mozola refused to confess to the crimes and died during the torture. 7 responsible for the death were sentenced to prison terms. 17 days later, the real murderer, Anatoly Onoprienko, was found after a massive manhunt, 7 years after his first murder. That is when the chilling truth about his crimes and murders was revealed. In a chilling confession, he admitted to a robbery gone horribly wrong in 1989, where he and his accomplice Sergei Rogozin committed a gruesome act of violence against a family, claiming the lives of 10 individuals, including 8 innocent children. The weapons they carried for self-defense became instruments of murder. However, Onoprienko revealed that he later cut all ties with Rogozin, a fellow criminal who continued to aid him in robbing numerous other houses. In that fateful year of 1989, his plan to burglarize a car took a sinister turn, resulting in the tragic deaths of an 11-year-old boy and 4 others. As they slept inside the vehicle, they were abruptly awakened by gunfire, their lives abruptly extinguished. To erase any evidence, he callously set their bodies ablaze. Onoprienko claimed that his original intention was solely to carry out the car burglary, never intending to take the lives of these 5 individuals. On December 24, 1995, while robbing the home of the Zychenko family in the village of Garmarnia, central Ukraine, he committed yet another act of brutality. Armed with a sawed-off, double-barreled shotgun, he mercilessly gunned down 4 family members before setting the house alight, leaving behind a scene of horror. January 2, 1996, saw the senseless deaths of 4 family members and a male pedestrian. Onoprienko coldly murdered the pedestrian to eliminate potential witnesses who could pose a problem for him later. This became a recurring pattern throughout his murderous spree, as he callously eliminated anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. In 3 separate incidents on January 6, 1996, along the Berdyansk-Dniprovsk highway, he unleashed his brutality once more. Stopping cars in their tracks, he ruthlessly murdered the unsuspecting drivers. Among the victims were Navy Ensign Kasai, Kolkhoz cook Kochergina, taxi driver Savitsky, and an unidentified individual. The next victims, on January 17, 1996, were 5 members of the Pilot family, who were brutally shot to death within the confines of their own home. 2 potential witnesses, railroad worker Konzela, age 27, and pedestrian Zakharko, age 56, met the same gruesome fate. Following this heinous act, Onoprienko set the Pilot's house ablaze, leaving nothing but ashes in his wake. On January 30, 1996, in the Fastiv area of Kyivska Oblast, he claimed more lives. His victims included Marusina and her 2 sons, along with a visitor named Zagranichny, aged 32, all ruthlessly gunned down. Continuing his spree of terror, Onoprienko targeted the Dubchak family next. On February 19, 1996, at their home in Olevsk, Zhytomyrska Oblast, he coldly shot and killed the father and son. The mother met a more gruesome fate, brutally mauled to death with a hammer. He then demanded money from the daughter, and when she refused, she too fell victim to his savage brutality. The house of the Bodnarchuk family in Malina, Lvivska Oblast, became his next scene of horror. On February 27, 1996, he brazenly trespassed into their home. He shot and killed the parents before using an axe to brutally end the lives of their two young daughters, aged 8 and 7. In a shocking act of violence, he also took the life of businessman Salk, a neighbor strolling around the Bodnarchuk's property. To further desecrate his victim's body, Onoprienko hacked Salk with the same axe he had used to commit his unfathomable crimes. The reign of terror orchestrated by the Terminator finally came to an end on April 16, 1996, when 37-year-old Anatoly Onoprienko was apprehended at his girlfriend's house in Zhytomyr, western Ukraine. His capture marked the end of a massive manhunt that involved 2,000 police officers and over 3,000 troops, triggered by an anonymous tip-off. Investigators feared that the number of victims attributed to Onoprienko could be even higher than the confirmed count of 52, as there were gaps in the timeline of his murders. When arrested, Onoprienko was found in possession of a 12-gauge shotgun that matched bullets discovered at one of the crime scenes. Furthermore, he had stolen jewelry and electrical equipment belonging to several of his victims. Shockingly, his girlfriend was wearing an engagement ring that he had obtained by cutting off one of his victim's fingers. Prior to his arrest, Onoprienko had worked as a sailor and studied forestry at university. He was already known to authorities and had been receiving outpatient treatment from a local psychiatric hospital department. Onoprienko showed no remorse for his actions. He exhibited a complete disregard for human life as he mercilessly annihilated entire families, assaulting children and even raping a woman after shooting her in the face. During his trial in November 1998, Onoprienko claimed to feel like a robot, driven for years by a dark force beyond his control. He argued that he should not be tried until authorities determined the source of this force. Hundreds of spectators watched the trial unfold, demanding justice for the victims. Onoprienko had devastated numerous villages throughout Ukraine, and the townspeople thirsted for retribution. Throughout the trial, Onoprienko remained mostly silent. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, he merely shrugged his shoulders and quietly replied, "No, nothing." When informed of his right to object to the court's proceedings, he growled, "This is your law. I consider myself a hostage." When asked about his nationality, he defiantly responded, "None." Upon being told that this was impossible, Onoprienko rolled his eyes and replied, "Well, according to law enforcement officers, I'm Ukrainian." Onoprienko's co-defendant, Sergei Rogozin, who was accused of assisting in the first 9 murders, proclaimed his innocence during the trial. Onoprienko's defense attempted to use the insanity plea, with him rambling incoherently during police interviews about CIA and Interpol conspiracies, unknown powers, and future revelations. However, psychiatrists declared him fit to stand trial. Onoprienko dismissed the conspiracies against him, stating, "I perceive it all as a kind of experiment. There can be no answer in this experiment to what you're trying to learn." The court found Onoprienko guilty and sentenced him to death. However, Ukraine, as a member of the Council of Europe, had pledged to suspend capital punishment and eventually abolish it. Therefore, he would not be executed. After his trial, Onoprienko declared, "I have never regretted anything, and I don't regret anything now." He continued to complain about the conspiracies perpetrated by higher powers and forces on Earth that sought to annihilate humanity. Claiming to possess special hypnotic powers and access to information unknown even to the president, he asserted that he had received permission from another world to carry out his killings. However, he provided no explanation for the motivations that drove him to destroy his victims. He shockingly declared, "I love all people and I love those I killed. I looked those children I murdered in the eyes and knew that it had to be done. For you, it's 52 murders. But for me, that's the norm. He expressed a desire for the death penalty, claiming he had no interest in relations with people, feeling that he had betrayed them. He expressed shock at people's indifference to his crimes, recalling how people screamed in neighboring villages as he committed his murders but received no help. They simply hid like mice. In an interview with a London Times reporter, Onoprienko recalled his killings, comparing them to hunting. He described feeling upset after shooting a deer in the woods during his early 20s, but never experiencing that feeling again. To him, killing people was like tearing apart a duvet, viewing men, women, old people, and children as indistinguishable masses. He felt no sorrow for those he killed, only blind indifference. The revulsion caused by Onoprienko's crimes in Ukraine led to consideration of temporarily lifting the moratorium on capital punishment imposed in March 1997 to execute him. The alternative of commuting his sentence to 20 years in jail would have outraged most Ukrainians. Some experts believe that Onoprienko's upbringing without parents and being sent to an orphanage by his elder brother played a role in his destruction of entire families. Strangely, his most vicious killing spree coincided with the time he moved in with the woman he intended to marry and her children, claiming that he was always very loving towards them. Onoprienko, however, insisted that he was possessed by a higher force, describing himself as part of an experiment to prove that man is capable of murder and learning to live with the consequences. He believed he was being groomed to serve Satan and vowed to continue killing if ever released. Ultimately, Anatoly Onoprienko's heinous crimes stained Ukraine's history and shattered the lives of countless families. While he received a death sentence, he would not face execution due to the country's commitment to abolishing capital punishment. On August 27, 2013, he succumbed to heart failure in the prison of Zhytomyr when he was 54 years old. The legacy of his monstrous acts continues to haunt the memories of those affected, leaving a lasting on the nation's collective consciousness. Andrei Chikatilo was born on the 16th of October 1936 in the village of Yabluchne in the Ukrainian SSR. He grew up in extreme poverty during the famine caused by Stalin's agricultural policies. Chikatilo's parents worked as collective farm laborers and struggled to feed the family. He endured hunger and often resorted to eating grass and leaves to survive. His mother told him stories of his older brother being kidnapped and cannibalized by neighbors, though the truth of this remains uncertain. Chikatilo experienced the horrors of World War II, witnessing bombings and shootings during the Nazi occupation. He suffered abuse from his mother for bedwetting and wore tattered clothing to school due to poverty. Despite his hardships, Chikatilo excelled academically and sought solace in reading and studying. His teachers recognized his intelligence and praised his academic achievements. In his teens, Chikatilo excelled academically and became deeply involved in communism. He held positions as the editor of his school newspaper and chairman of the Communist Party Committee. However, he also struggled with chronic impotence, which intensified his social awkwardness and self-hatred. His first crush, Lilia Barasheva, remained unfulfilled as he was too nervous to ask her out. After graduation, Chikatilo's application to Moscow State University was rejected. He worked as a laborer in Kursk before enrolling in a vocational school. In his first serious relationship, he struggled with impotence, leading to its eventual end. After vocational training, Chikatilo worked on a construction project in Nizhny Tagil and pursued engineering courses. In 1957, he was drafted into the Soviet Army, serving as a border guard in Central Asia, and later in a KGB communications unit in East Berlin. He had a commendable record and joined the Communist Party before his military service ended in 1960. Following his service, Chikatilo returned to his hometown and briefly worked on the collective farm with his parents. He entered a relationship with a divorcee, but their attempts at intimacy failed due to his impotence. When word got out among his peers, he felt deep shame and attempted suicide by hanging. Fortunately, his mother and neighbors intervened and saved him. Fearing the judgment and rejection, he decided to escape from his homeland. After relocating to a town near Rostov-on-Don in 1961, Chikatilo worked as a communications engineer. His sister, Tatiana, lived with him briefly before getting married. In 1963, Chikatilo married Feodosia Odnacheeva, introduced to him by his sister. They had a daughter in 1965 and a son in 1969. In 1964, Chikatilo enrolled at Rostov University, studying Russian literature and philology. He completed his degree in 1970. He briefly worked in sports management before becoming a teacher of Russian language and literature in Novoshakhtinsk. However, Chikatilo struggled to maintain discipline in his classes and was often mocked by his students. In May 1973, Chikatilo committed his first known assault on a 15-year-old girl, forcefully groping her while she struggled. Months later, he assaulted and beat another teenage girl. Despite complaints and witnessing, he faced no consequences. His predatory behavior led him to invade girls' dormitories and loiter around public toilets. Chikatilo's teaching career ended in March 1981 due to multiple complaints of child molestation. He then took on a supply clerk job, but his violent and twisted desires would soon escalate, unleashing a reign of terror and gruesome crimes. In September 1978, Chikatilo committed his first documented murder in Shakhty. He lured 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova to a hut he had secretly purchased. During the assault, he failed to achieve an erection and, in frustration, choked and stabbed her, ejaculating as he did so. Chikatilo then strangled her unconscious and disposed of her body in the nearby river. Evidence pointed to Chikatilo, but another man, Alexander Kravchenko, was wrongly arrested. Despite having a strong alibi, Kravchenko was coerced into confessing and convicted for the murder. Chikatilo, fueled by his dark desires, found gratification in stabbing and slashing his victims to achieve sexual arousal. He struggled to resist these urges, often cutting short trips to avoid the temptation to find his next victim. On the 3rd of September 1981, Chikatilo lured 17-year-old Larisa Tkachenko to a forest, pretending they would drink vodka and relax. Unable to achieve an erection, he choked and killed her, mutilating her body with his teeth and a stick. 9 months later, on the 12th of June 1982, he encountered 13-year-old Lyubov Biryuk and brutally stabbed and slashed her to death, imitating intercourse. Chikatilo continued his spree, targeting children, runaways, and young vagrants, enticing them to secluded areas and killing them by stabbing, slashing, or strangling. He often mutilated their eye sockets and would achieve orgasm only when he stabbed and slashed them. His adult victims were often prostitutes or homeless women, while children and adolescents of both sexes were lured with various ruses. Chikatilo made minimal efforts to conceal the bodies before leaving the crime scenes. On the 11th of December 1982, he brutally murdered 10-year-old Olga Stalmakhanok, inflicting over 50 stab wounds and mutilating her body. In January 1983, the discovery of 4 victims with similar patterns tentatively linked them to a single killer. Major Mikhail Fedosov led a Moscow police team to Rostov to direct the investigation, known as Operation Forest Path. Forensic analyst Viktor Burakov joined the team and confirmed the presence of a serial killer based on the mutilations and striations on the victims' eye sockets. Chikatilo's next victim, Laura Sarkisyan, was found in June 1983, followed by 5 more victims by September. The accumulation of bodies and the similarities in the wounds forced the authorities to acknowledge the existence of a serial killer. Initially, theories revolved around organ harvesting, satanic cults, or a mentally ill individual. Police focused on mentally ill, homosexual, and pedophile suspects. Confessions were obtained from intellectually disabled youths under brutal interrogation, leading to suicides and the resolution of unrelated crimes. However, bodies continued to be discovered, proving the confessed suspects were not the killer. Additional victims, such as Vera Shevkun and Sergei Markov, were found with characteristic mutilations but differing eye injuries. In early 1984, Chikatilo killed 2 women in Rostov's Park of Aviators. He then lured a 10-year-old boy named Dmitry Ptashnikov away and was seen by witnesses, providing a detailed description of him. Ptashnikov's body was discovered with evidence that pointed to the killer. Chikatilo continued his spree, killing a woman named Tatiana Petrosyan and her 10-year-old daughter, as well as several young women and a 13-year-old boy. He was fired from his job for theft, but found another position shortly after. In August, he killed a 16-year-old girl in the Park of Aviators and lured a 17-year-old girl to the Don River, where he brutally attacked and mutilated her. Chikatilo then went on a business trip before returning and killing more victims, including a young woman, a 10-year-old girl, and an 11-year-old boy. On September 13, 1984, Chikatilo was arrested by undercover detectives for approaching young women and engaging in inappropriate behavior. He was found with a knife, rope, and Vaseline. Although his physical description matched that of a suspect seen with one of the victims, his blood type analysis initially ruled him out as the killer. Chikatilo was convicted of theft and sentenced to 1 year in prison, but was released after serving only 3 months. The charges against mentally disabled individuals who had previously confessed to the murders were dropped. Chikatilo resumed his killings in August 1985 with the murder of Natalia Poklistova in Moscow. The investigation expanded, involving multiple procurators and detectives, and a psychiatrist was consulted to create a psychological profile of the unknown killer. The psychological profile created by Dr. Bukhanovsky described the killer as a reclusive man in his late 40s or early 50s, who had a painful and isolated childhood. He was unable to form romantic relationships with women and experienced impotence. The killer derived sexual pleasure from seeing his victims suffer, using the murders as a substitute for sexual intercourse. The profile suggested that the killer was well-educated, likely married with children, and worked in a profession that required travel. Chikatilo closely followed the investigation, controlling his homicidal urges. For almost a year, no victims matching the killer's signature mutilations were found. Some investigators speculated that the killer may have relocated or changed his modus operandi. In 1987, Chikatilo committed 3 murders while on business trips outside of the Rostov Oblast, none of which were initially connected to the ongoing manhunt. In 1988, Chikatilo resurfaced and continued his killing spree. He murdered an unidentified woman in Krasny Sulin in April, followed by 2 boys in May and July. The victims displayed similar knife wounds to those previously linked to the manhunt, but there were some differences that made investigators uncertain about the connection. However, the murder of a 9-year-old boy named Alexei Voronko in Ilovaisk left no doubt that the killer had struck again. The resurfacing of victims definitively linked to the manhunt led to a new police operation. Plainclothed officers were stationed at railway stations throughout the Rostov Oblast, while undercover agents patrolled smaller stations. The goal was to discourage the killer from striking at prominent locations and to capture him in the act. The police also implemented hidden cameras on trains to gather evidence. Chikatilo's final murder occurred in November 1990. He killed a 22-year-old woman near Donleskos station, where he was observed by an undercover officer. The officer noticed suspicious behavior, such as washing his hands and face at a well and having soil stains on his clothing. When the officer stopped Chikatilo and checked his papers, there was no reason for immediate arrest. However, the officer filed a routine report, which later caught the attention of investigators. After examining reports and conducting further investigations, police placed Chikatilo under surveillance. He was observed approaching young women and children, engaging them in conversation. On November 20th, after 6 days of surveillance, Chikatilo was arrested by plainclothes police officers while wandering around Novocherkassk, attempting to make contact with children. The arrest marked the end of Chikatilo's reign of terror, bringing relief to the investigators and the public. The resurfacing of victims and the pressure from the media and government had intensified the search for the killer, leading to his eventual capture. Upon his second arrest, Chikatilo initially denied his involvement in the murders and complained about being wrongly arrested before. However, during a strip search, a deep flesh wound on his finger was discovered, which was determined to be a human bite. Chikatilo had never sought medical treatment for injury. Further evidence was found in his belongings, including a knife and ropes. Blood group analysis confirmed that his semen matched the blood type of the murderer. The police used a strategy to make Chikatilo believe he was mentally ill and in need of help, hoping he would confess. Eventually, on November 29th, after reading extracts from his psychological profile, Chikatilo burst into tears and confessed to the crimes. He provided detailed descriptions of each murder, drawing rough sketches of the crime scenes. Chikatilo confessed to 36 of the 38 murders and was charged accordingly. Later, he confessed to an additional 20 killings. Chikatilo's trial began on April 14, 1992, and received significant media attention. The judge conducted an open trial, and Chikatilo was questioned in detail about each charge. He often gave dismissive replies, except when accused of stealing personal possessions from the victims. The trial revealed gruesome details of the murders, including Chikatilo's mutilation and cannibalistic acts. On the 14th of February 1994, Andrei Chikatilo's final appeal for clemency was rejected, and he was taken to a soundproofed room in Novocherkassk prison. With a single gunshot behind the right ear, Chikatilo was executed that day. His remains were laid to rest in an unmarked grave within the prison cemetery. Thank you all for watching and diving into the minds and history of this 5 extremely disturbing serial killers. Share your thoughts down below, like and subscribe if you liked it. Thank you for being here. Stay curious, and stay safe.